Sometimes our job as a coach is to continue the work and bring in reinforcement. When I bring in a psychotherapist, I will say, I am no longer the boss in the treatment plan. The boss in the treatment plan is the psychotherapist. And if the psychotherapist says stop coaching, then you stop coaching. But if I say there's a pathology here and I can't do anything about it, I'm in danger of making the client feel dropped. So this is why it's really important. When you take on a client, you have a moral obligation to take on that client. Are you well-resourced to do that? Do you have a network of therapists? Do you have a network of people that you can call? Do you have a peer group that you can talk to and say, holy shit, this thing is happening here?
I'll make it as a coach, light the spark inside, empower every soul to turn the tide. I'll make it as a coach, help others grow, changing lives with every story I know.
Jerry Colonna is an executive coach rooted in the business and venture capital world. And yet his coaching practice is deeply informed by psychoanalysis. He says the past is always present, and also in coaching, not only in therapy, but also in coaching, we can't ignore it. We demoed this idea very drastically on the last episode, where Jerry and I explored how the history of my father and even my grandparents influenced my unconscious patterns. On today's episode, we look further into this kind of craft, unpacking Jerry's infamous questions for self-inquiry, why we can call a client complicit in creating the circumstances they say they don't want, but why it might not be helpful to call them responsible. We also look at in what ways my quest to deconstruct Jerry's methodology for myself, but also for you, might not be the way after all to become impactful coaches if we listen to Jerry. But if all of that sounds a bit cryptic, let's hear from Jerry himself. So, Reboot, your first book, has a subtitle that says The Art of Growing Up. What does it mean to grow up?
Well, one of the first conclusions I came to when writing the book, and I wrote of this in the introduction, was that better humans make better leaders. And there's a corollary here. What I mean by growing up is really more fully understanding who we are and how we are, and really connecting to the unconscious motivations that have shaped our lives so that we're more in the driver's seat. There's a useful phrase I use, radical self-inquiry. And what I mean by that phrase, it's the process by which the masks that we wear are slowly and compassionately taken off so that we've got no place left to hide, and most importantly, from ourselves. So it's a grown-up, if you will, in my language, is someone who is willing to look deeply in the mirror with curiosity and compassion so that they can really realize their full potential and not harm other people. We live in a world right now where there's people with terrible, terrible characterological faults hold enormous power. And the result is people are hurt. People die. We have a bunch of people who are in power who are not grown-ups. That's what I mean. And I'll say one other thing. The last line of Reboot is, and with that, I mastered the art of growing up. And the reason I said that is because it is very much an art, not a science. And it is very much a process of growing that actually never ends. See, you're always becoming. You're never done.
What helps to facilitate this process? So if I paraphrase it in my language, I would say it's a lot about understanding these subroutines that you mentioned on our previous conversations, understanding the inner beliefs that shape me, that maybe are not even my own originally, but that I sort of inherited from previous generations. How do you, in your programs and coaching sessions, unearth these, dig into these and help clients to understand these subroutines and beliefs?
Well, first of all, let me affirm what you observed. Yes, it's the process of using radical self-inquiry and deep, powerful questions to unearth things. As I've mentioned, my infamous question of how have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want is a perfect example of the kind of radical self-inquiry that is necessary to unearth the unconscious motivations. And to unpack that question just for a little bit, because this is part of the process here. Complicit is different than responsible. I always point out that the word complicit is related to the word accomplice. And the accomplice in the bank robbery is the one who drives the getaway car, not the one who sticks up the bank teller, right? And this is important because when we start to unpack things, one of the impulses is to become self-critical. I cannot believe that I do this stupid thing that I do. Okay, self-criticism, just like guilt, shuts down the inquiry process and actually leaves us trapped in the subroutine. It's only by being compassionate and curious that we can understand that we are not responsible. Your obsession with being safe, for example, is not necessarily rooted in your DNA, your genetic structure. It's in your emotional DNA. It's something that you inherited. And it wasn't done maliciously. It was done to keep you safe. It was done out of love. So as a coach, my job is to listen closely, pay attention to what is happening at the sub-level, and then ask the question that is designed to help the client surface their own answer. There's one thing that I do appreciate about all coaching programs is they all start with the basic suppositions the client is healthy, is whole, and that more often than not, that what they're dealing with is a blockage from understanding that wholeness. That speaks to its roots in Carl Rogers' work or Martin Seligman's positive psychology work. It's rooted in the belief that we're not working with pathologies. We're working with healthy people who are stuck in patterns and routines and that kind of thing. So our job is to ask questions, make observations, pay close attention, listen to repeated words, listen to patterns. Pay attention when, a man's Adam's apple bobs up and down as they mention their mother. Oh, something's up there. Yeah, see, it just happened to you. Just mentioning her brings it up. And so you pay attention. You said before that you were trained in NLP. You know how that's one of the things NLP does really well is to pay attention to the body. Where are the eyes tracking? Where does that take us? Is that in the past or is that in the future? And we pull all this together and then we ask the zinger of a question. Tell me about your mother. Just kidding.
Yeah. So in the end, what you are saying is like one of your main tools in unearthing these beliefs is questions. And yeah, I think you're quite well known for a few of these questions. And I just pulled, as you were mentioning it, I just pulled it up here on a board. I think this is one of the most famous ones. How are you complicit in creating the conditions you say you don't want?
Right.
And I would love to unpack that a bit. And you just pointed out it's a very conscious choice to not say responsible here, but
That's right.
making it an accomplice, because that helps the client to not take the blame in a way and not make this a conversation about blame.
That's right. That's right. Blame, shame, and guilt, right? Blame, shame, and guilt block the client from the inquiry process that is necessary to create the conditions for transformation. I'll say that again. Blame, shame, and guilt block the client from the inquiry process necessary to complete the transformation. All right. So you're right to focus on that word complicit. It drives me crazy because this question bounces around the internet every day a billion times, and I wish I had trademarked it so that people could give me the credit. God damn it. No, just kidding. And almost every time I encounter it, I almost have to explain yet again, complicit, not responsible. And the reason that goes on, Toby, is that so much of the self-help literature and the self-help mindset is so focused on helping people see how they're responsible for things. It's misguided. Okay, it's well-intentioned, but it's misguided. The focus on responsibility is intended to give people the sense of agency. If I'm responsible, then therefore I have the power to change it. And that is true. But the problem is it directs the client in the wrong place. And how have I been responsible in creating the conditions I say I don't want? I say I don't want to be overweight. So I'm going to be responsible and diet. And then I fail. And what happens? I just feel guilt. I feel like shit. I feel like the piece of shit that I always tell myself I am. Okay, great. Mazel tov. We've just made the client feel terrible. That's not what this is about. This is about evoking curiosity. As I said before, how do we surface the benefit that this pattern behavior has created in our lives? Okay, now that flips to the second half of the question. The question is not how have I been complicit in creating the conditions in my life, which is, again, sometimes how people interpret it. The question is, how have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? Now, what am I getting at there? What I'm getting at is what we consciously talk about wanting in our lives is very often not the thing that we want. You mean we can be our own worst enemy? Yeah. But more important, there is some sort of benefit in the maintenance of it. I'll give you a simplistic example. How many clients do we all have who say, I am just so busy? I am so busy. Toby, you have no idea how busy I am. I am exhausted. And so a good coaching question is, what is the positive feeling you get from being busy? Oh, I feel useful. I feel productive. Oh, my father, who always told me that you have to be productive, is satisfied because I'm busy, because I'm productive. Oh, okay. So now we know. You say you don't want to be busy, but if you stop being busy, you're going to feel anxious. You're going to worry about whether or not you're enough. So we need to unpack, we need to solve the other challenge, which is that I get a sense of self-worth from the things that I do, not from my inherent humanity. That's why that question is so powerful and why so many people connect to that question.
Yeah. So it's again about looking for the positive intention actually behind the behavior and acknowledging that intention with empathy and bringing us back to self-compassion.
That's right. I think it's Carl Buchheit who developed Marin NLP. This is the person I heard it first from. He used to call the IPO, not initial public offering, but the intended positive outcome. There's almost always an intended positive outcome, even from our worst behaviors. In nonviolent communications training, which is also a very useful training, the focus is on the needs. What need are we trying to meet? Because we're almost always focused on a need. We're trying to get, in my parlance, we're trying to feel loved or to love. We're trying to feel safe, and we're trying to feel like we belong. And what's crazy making is sometimes our worst behaviors have an IPO, an intended positive outcome, that's so removed from how we actually feel, right? I will work myself to the bone so that I can finally feel loved. Okay, that's nutty. Or more specifically, it's kind of the logic of an 8-year-old.
And how do you bring up these questions in an actual coaching? So you've written about them in your book. You say they float around on the internet. How do they find their way into the actual coaching journey, let's say, if not even the conversation?
So you've already experienced some of my coaching, if you will. Notice how natural it is. I don't go in and say, what are the 5 questions that I have to ask here? Questions that I have written, things that I write about, grew out retrospectively from examining what it was that I was doing in a coaching session. So you asked, how does this come up? And again, the coach's job, the coach's tool, if you will, is a well-asked question. The task behind the job, behind the task, behind the question, behind the tool is we take a stance that has one eye on the client and one eye inward, paying attention to what's going on. We're listening with empathy that is deep and profound. And then we ask the question that simply intuitively arises from inside of us, not from the methodology. Ooh, I listened to Jerry, so I have to ask 5 times a day, how have I been complicit? Or how have you been complicit in creating? Stop. Do not turn Jerry's work into a methodology. Please, for God's sake, okay? Do not emulate Jerry. Be Toby. Trust Toby.
Earlier you said you have like a team of 10 coaches at Reboot.
Mm-hmm.
Have they been trained?
In lots of different methodologies. One of the things I like about our happy little band of warriors is that there's a wide diversity of experiences. There is some similarity in everybody, in that one way to think about it is there's a Venn diagram that I think underlies every good coach. And the various components of the Venn diagram include some sort of spirituality, some sort of spiritual awareness, deep and profound understanding of psychology, an awareness of issues, because we are an executive coaching firm. And so being able to speak fluently the language of leadership and business is extremely important. And then I would add, as the final piece of that Venn diagram, is a profound commitment to self-growth and self-awareness. And in that overlapping center of that Venn diagram lies a Reboot coach. As a coaching company, many years ago, I'm a former VC. Their impulse was at one point, well, let's raise $50 million and build a worldwide global coaching platform, blah, blah, blah. Oh, $1 billion IPO, blah, blah. I don't fucking give a shit. I don't really care. At times when I get afraid of money, sometimes I'm like, what an idiot. I could have done this. But really, all that would take me away from the work. I did not go through everything I went through in my life to end up living a life that was shallow and hollow and in pursuit of quieting my worst fears. That's not how I want to live. So our commitment is to live through that Venn diagram, to do the exploration. And some of the coaches are more somatically aware than I am. I come at it from a psychoanalytic perspective. Some of the coaches come at it from a more mindfulness-based experience. Some of the coaches come at it from a more direct experience. We have one coach who's both a world-class trained guitarist and former CEO of a music production company, who's in his early 70s, and he's just a badass kind of guy. Ray, yeah, I'm talking about you, Ray. So it's like a mix of things. My co-founder, Ali, has a master's degree in religious studies and brings spirituality, sensibility, and not necessarily like a traditional approach, a kind of badassery around that kind of spirituality or meanings there.
So just recapping that Venn diagram you mentioned, you said a business acumen, speaking the language of your clients simply because you navigate in that industry. Then this like deep commitment towards the art of growing up for my own sake, doing my own work, and actually the awareness that this work is continuous and not completed.
That's right. And the psychological sophistication, the fluidity around that, the coaching training, which is different, the sensibility, whether it's mindfulness or a body-centered approach. It's this notion of we're not always what we say. We're more often than not what we feel and what we do.
Another question that I have gotten, I think it was on your email journeys. You have this self-inquiry email journey that resonated.
Oh, you've been taking one of our courses.
Yeah, if you want. At least I received them.
Yeah.
Taking and receiving is still you have to do the work.
Gotcha. Yes, you do. You have to do the work.
Yeah, but another one that I actually did reflect on and that noted down for today was also this: who are you really serving right now? And I think the resonance that I felt there is also going back to our previous conversation in a way, becoming aware of what beliefs did I inherit? And yeah, can you take us into the origin and motivation behind this question?
Well, if you unpack it a little bit, probably the operative question there is the word really. If you think about it for a moment, if I just say the phrase, who are you serving right now? We started our first conversation, you asked me about what my mission was. And I made the point that I could just spout off something that had no meaning and no authenticity. I could just say shit that sounds good. And the more practice you get at doing podcasts and writing essays for LinkedIn and blah, 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 The more capable you are at saying something that goes viral. Oh my God, it gets 1,000 likes. Isn't that great? But who are you really serving? Reminds me of one of my most infamous questions is not the complicity question. Decades ago, I got tagged with this notion that this man makes founders cry. This man makes people cry. Okay. And I used to answer that with, you know how I make people cry? I asked them a question, how are you really? No bullshit. How are you really? Because we are socialized to answer the question, I'm fine. How are you? And it's bullshit. Okay. There's a land war in Europe right now. I'm both. I'm blessed. I have brilliant children. I have a loving wife. I'm about to have a second grandchild. I get to do the most meaningful work of my life. And I live under the shadow of terror. Both is true. Both are true. And therefore it's hard. So the operative piece of that question is who are you really serving? Not what's the story you're telling yourself. And I'm really serving the ghost of my grandfather. I'm really serving my grandmother who had to escape a pogrom. And so as a result, grew up in her own shadow of terror.
How has the awareness of this, who are you really serving, changed you?
James Baldwin, the writer, said, not everything that is faced can be transformed, but nothing can be transformed until it's faced. Who are you really serving is the kind of question that forces one to face the things that cause the conditions in the first place. We cannot become the people we were born to be until we are willing to consciously create our own story, our own life. And so by acknowledging that, like everybody else, I carry these ghosts, the ghosts of my ancestors, both biological and adopted, in me. I have ancestry that goes back to southern Italy with deep poverty that my ancestors had to escape from, and ancestors, biological ancestors that go all the way back to Ireland. I have an ancestor who may have been transported to Australia for the crime of stealing back from the Baron who took it, the cow that provided milk for his family. I have ancestors who knew famine. So my fear of not having enough is deeply rooted. So when that fear makes itself known and causes distress, say in my marriage, or causes me to fight, or causes me to grasp, by understanding the roots of that and understanding my ancestors' fears notwithstanding, I am safe. I can then transform that fear into service to other people.
And that's exactly the point where I would like to dig in. Because this kind of work, these kinds of questions, you worked on this a lot for yourself. And I assume now at Reboot and the bootcamps that you do and the coaching practice that you do, you also translate this into the transformation that maybe the leaders that you mentioned would need, and certainly the business leaders that actually book a bootcamp with you get. How does this process look like for them? Do they get the homework before they attend the bootcamp to actually talk to their parents about family history? Or how do you make that very hands-on and practical, this getting into this kind of work?
So before I answer your question, notice again the engineering mindset that you have where you want to know all the steps. And we're going to blow it a kiss because it's an important part of who you are, okay? And it helped you get to where you are. And yes, we do these kinds of, we lay out pre-work. Right now, we've got a boot camp that will be running in March. And all of the attendees, we're doing something we've never done before. All of the attendees have been in a peer group since November. And so when they arrive, there's already a cohesion among the group. And some of the content of the camp is going to be classic Reboot book content, but some of the content will be reunion work, which is all about relating to our ancestors. But I want to take a step back because the first half of your observation and question was really about the jumping off point was about doing this work in service of others, of creating the conditions for the others. And I want to bring your attention back to the first thing that you were asking me about in our first conversation, which is about my mission. And I referenced the importance of the bodhisattva vow. Now, as long as space endures, as long as there are beings to be found, may I likewise continue to remain to drive away the sorrows of the world. That comes from Shantideva, who is one of the most important Buddhist teachers in the Tibetan tradition. Every day I make the vow to drive away the sorrows of the world. And every day I will fail, because there are always more sorrows than there are bodhisattvas. But I'm going to keep trying. So it's this combination of the why and the how, I guess, that I was getting to in that regard. We do the boot camps. The boot camps, people are fascinated by our boot camps, and that's great. We've been doing them since 2013. But what they are is an extraordinary platform for personal transformation. And that's what's really interesting to me. It's part of my bodhisattva vow.
Can you walk us through on a high level, like how does the schedule of a bootcamp look like?
No, just kidding. Every camp unfolds slightly differently. I am a big fan, and it drives my colleagues a little crazy at times, of what I call emergent experience. See, if you listen carefully to retreat participants, just like you listen carefully to clients in a coaching session, you have to give them what they need in the moment. Now, that said, there is a sort of broad structure, and the broad structure begins with setting the conditions of the container. Nothing like this will work unless the container itself is safe. So you're establishing safety very early on. You're also establishing, there's a great line in The Wizard of Oz, the original movie, in which Dorothy turns to Toto, a dog, and says, "Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore." There's this moment where people realize they're not in Kansas anymore. And usually I say something like, "And welcome to boot camp." Because boot camp is not, I call it boot camp. We started calling it boot camp. It's not about sleeping on the ground in the middle of the rain, like a military boot camp. It's an emotional boot camp. And as I always say to the coaches and the facilitators, it's not boot camp unless it also kicks the ass of the coaches and facilitators. It's a joint experience of depth. There is a tremendous amount of poetry. There's a tremendous amount of connection to nature. There's a tremendous amount of dyad work and triad work. There's a tremendous amount of journaling. And there's a tremendous amount of work in circle. There's a phrase that Parker Palmer, who is one of my teachers and dearest friends, uses in a book called A Hidden Wholeness. And he says, it's individual work that can only be done in group. And that's a guiding principle to what we do. Is that enough of a framework for you?
Yes, and of course I will dig in a bit more. So what I hear is it's a lot contracting in a way that also sets up participants to be ready to go deep, to be vulnerable. And
yeah. So understand that people apply to the bootcamp. There are a lot of people who want to treat it as a performative experience. We don't do that. We're skilled at this point of sussing out the people who, I'll be honest, we get a lot of coaches who want to come to our boot camps because they want to learn things. Okay, when I said before that it's not boot camp unless the facilitators have their asses kicked. See, if we approach it from an intellectual stance, let me see what Jerry does in a boot camp, then you're remaining apart, and that's not acceptable. You can
so the
only
magic
come
happens
to the boot camp
if the magic happens if also facilitators go beyond their comfort zone.
That's right. That's exactly right. The minute it becomes routine or rote, I change the content.
You mentioned the dyad and triad work. How does that look like?
Well, a dyad is two people doing work together, and they may do it in partnership walk, or they may do it one-on-one facing each other. And triads means three people doing it. But the point is that we use each other as mirrors to create deeper exploration. To come to our boot camp, you are committed to not only your work, but also being there for others. To create safety, again, borrowing language from Parker Palmer's A Hidden Wholeness, we, for example, have adopted a notion of what he calls double confidentiality. And double confidentiality works this way. There's the obvious confidentiality that every retreat does, which is what What happens in this retreat stays in this retreat. You are not allowed to reveal. That's easy. What's more difficult is if you and I are in a retreat together and you say something that's really triggering for me. You talk about, say, your father, and all of a sudden it brings up my father. I actually have to respect the fact that you are having your own experience. And I cannot come up to you and say, hey, Toby, remember that thing that you said about your father? Can we talk about that more? No. Whereas if you come to me and say, would you mind if we went for a walk and I shared with you some more about what I shared about? See, my job as holder of the container is to keep every soul safe. Because if the soul, if the spirit is not safe, then the individual cannot do their work. So I was so adamant about this in the early days. You know how like you sit in circle, I'm sure you've done this, and somebody says something and they start to cry and everybody rushes to give them a tissue. I was so adamant about this. I was like, you're not even allowed to run across the room and give somebody a tissue. I don't want the experience, the emotional experience to be interrupted. Now, I'm not so rigid about that anymore. But when we first started, you weren't even allowed to share last names because I wanted to create this cauldron of intensity. Yeah, we've relaxed that a bit. It still remains safe.
Yeah. Maybe coming back to what we talked about earlier about coaches sticking to their safe space, the methodology they learned. What I also notice about your work and this looking back at family heritage, the beliefs we inherited, for me, it goes beyond what I learned coaching is, in the sense that it looks into the past, which way you sort of enter therapy space. What would you respond there? Like, where do you draw the line between therapy, coaching, and what we as coaches are supposed to do?
Yeah. So notice the supposed to. There's a right way, there's a wrong way, and there's a way that works. Notice that. Notice how scared coach training programs and the coaches who train in the coach training programs get when we start to approach this. But I want you to notice something. Why are you drawn to my work? You, as a coach, why are you drawn to my work?
Your story resonated, the family, the parallels I see in our family history, maybe.
Yeah, but as a coach, what makes it fascinating about the way I coach?
And I think for me personally, also the overlap between entrepreneurship, tech, and coaching, personal development, therapy.
I was asking, and I don't know if this is true for you. I thought it might be, but we'll see. I was asking because what my experience has been is the more I've spoken about the way I coach, the more I encounter coaches who say, yeah, see that, I want to do that. You're right. There are a lot of training programs that say, don't go there. And they create this false dichotomy that you yourself use, which is the past. Well, that's the realm of therapy. And I believe it's a misunderstanding of Carl Rogers. It's a misunderstanding of Martin Seligman, the roots of modern coaching. It misunderstands because the fear of the coach training programs is we're going to break the client. And so what happens is the client is dropped. The client is left in this zone of transformation. A really brilliant coach who best epitomizes what I'm talking about is Manfred Kitz de Vries, who was the original CEO Whisperer, who is a psychoanalyst and executive coach. Read his book, The Leader on the Couch. Read his book, Coach and Couch, okay? What are we in this business to do? We're in this business to effectuate transformation by any means necessary. Now, does it require that I, as the coach, have to do supervision? I have to be mindful of my own shit. I have to be mindful of the fact that I can delude myself that something I'm doing is working. Yeah, of course. And the real question, the coaching versus therapy question, you know what it turns on? It's not turning on the past and the present. That's bullshit. It turns on pathology or non-pathology. Because if you do this work, you are going to encounter depression. If you do this work, you're going to encounter anxiety. If you do this work, you may even encounter mental illness. I would argue that 25% of all Silicon Valley CEOs experience some form of narcissistic personality disorder. I'm kidding, not really, okay? Is a very common phenomena. read The Productive Narcissist. It's a great book by a Harvard psychologist who talks about the predominance of narcissism in business leadership. Because the narcissist promises the sun, the moon, and the stars. Believe in me and I will transform your life. Sometimes they end up in politics, by the way. So the split between therapy and coaching should be focused on pathology and illness, not focused on past and present. Because the truth is, the past is always present. Always, 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 always present. And it does a disservice to the client to deny that reality.
And how do I know this pathology?
That's a great question. That's a really great question. It's a good thing you have a supervisor to talk to about what's going on. I'll give you a quick story. I remember years and years ago, a very famous founder of a really important internet company came to my office with his number 2, and they wanted coaching. And this is an office I had in New York, and I sit in a chair, and there's a little couch, and the couch can seat 2 people, a little sofa, and then there's another chair on the left-hand side, okay? And the founder in question comes in, sits right in the middle of the couch and sticks his arms out, okay, preventing his co-founder from having a seat. Session ends. I call my therapist, I call my analyst to act as supervisor. And it's like, holy shit, this experience. And she said, how did it feel being annihilated by a narcissist? Because that's what was going on, okay? There's certain aspects of it. I could work with that client. It was unpleasant, but I could work with that client. But when that client's narcissism also morphed into bipolarity, and he was a high functioning, fast cycling, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, bipolar, I called a friend who was a psychoanalyst and I said, I need your help. And then we got him a psychiatrist and got him on medication, created some stability, and I continued working. Sometimes our job as a coach is to continue the work and bring in reinforcement. When I bring in a psychotherapist, I will say, I am no longer the boss in the treatment plan. The boss in the treatment plan is the psychotherapist. And if the psychotherapist says, stop coaching, then you stop coaching. But if I say there's a pathology here and I can't do anything about it, I'm in danger of making the client feel dropped. So this is why it's really important when you take on a client, you have a moral obligation to take on that client. Are you well-resourced to do that? Do you have a network of therapists? Do you have a network of people that you can call? Do you have a peer group that you can talk to and say, holy shit, this thing is happening here? If not, stop, build those networks, and then you can be a coach.
So in a way, it comes back to reflecting a lot about what is happening in your sessions by yourself with the supervisor.
That's right.
And
that's your obligation. The work is not about saying the right thing. It's about presence. It's about how you hold yourself as a coach. Irving Yalom, the psychotherapist, has this great quote in one of his books, The Art of Psychotherapy, in which he says, the healing is in the presence. The healing is in the presence. The healing is in the presence. He repeats the line 3 times. Same thing is true in coaching.
Thank you. Maybe to close off, as we talked a lot about questions, what is a question that you, from today's perspective, would ask Cherry, the young coach from 20 years ago?
That's a good question. I don't know. Let me think about it for a second. Why is it so important to you to heal people? Now, in hindsight, I know the answer. But I think 25, 30 years ago, if I spent a little bit more time with that question, it might have been helpful for me. That said, I have thoroughly enjoyed my journey, even if it's kicked my ass at times. It's really one of the many ways in which I feel blessed is to have had this journey all these years.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it with Cherry Colonna. If you want to go further with Cherry's work, I guess the best starting point is his books Reboot and Reunion. And you can also go to reboot.io, where you can find the self-inquiry email course that I also took in preparation for today, where you can find some of the questions we unpacked. If you missed the first episode with Cherry, then I can highly recommend to check out the live coaching demo there. it really makes some of the themes of today much more practical. And if there's one thing I've taken away for my practice as a coach from the conversation with Jerry, then it is the importance of self-reflection and of supervision for us as coaches. So how fitting that my guest in 2 weeks is exactly an expert in this. We are doing an actual supervision demo, leveraging the power of pictures for us as coaches to reflect on our coaching. If you want to check out the online coaching and visualization platform that we also used on today's episode, go to metafox.online. With the code IMPACTFUL, you can even get 3 months of entirely free pro access. That's it for today. If this conversation made you think, share it with a coach in your life or drop me a message on LinkedIn or toby@metafox.eu if you have any feedback. You can, of course, also leave comments on your favorite podcast platform where you listen this to. And with that, I finally close off. I'm Toby, co-founder of Metafox. All the best on your journey towards becoming an impactful coach, and see you back here in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.